Mark Kimmitt is the former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs. He joins us now live from Baghdad to speak further. Hi, Mark. You know, U.S. lawmakers have tried before to prevent the support that the United States has provided Saudi Arabia, particularly in the war in Yemen. It hasn't worked. But is the tide finally changing, do you think? Are Americans becoming more aware that their tax dollars may be complicit in actual war crimes?
Well, first of all, the two words that I would take issue with, one is war crimes and one is complicit. I think it's very, very important to firmly establish that there's a link between the United States and some of these potential war crimes and allegations of war crimes going on the ground. I'm not saying that's not the case, but the real point you're making is the U.S. Congress is taking a hard look at our support to Saudi Arabia and its actions in Yemen and how our arms manufacturers might be enabling the Saudis to commit those potential war crimes.
I'm just curious as to what you make of the timing of this. Do you think it has to do with the Jamal Khashoggi murder?
Yeah, and that's really what sort of disturbs me most of all. There has been concern about Yemen for years and years. Hundreds of thousands of people have either emigrated or have been injured in this conflict. But in the case of Jamal Khashoggi, we're talking, sadly, about only one person. Now, that one person's life is important, but I don't know how it is that all of a sudden somebody from the press gets killed and all of a sudden the outrage begins. If there was outrage to be had, why wasn't it started a couple of years ago when we started seeing innocent civilians being killed by the Houthis and other atrocities going on inside of Yemen?
We know it's how the world works, though, Mark. It's how a story is actually sold that can prompt the reaction. But let me ask you this. I mean, the U.S. has a history of supporting regimes that violate human rights, particularly as a bulwark against Iran. We saw it with Saddam Hussein decades back. And that's how U.S. supporters of Saudi will combat this report, actually. Can they convince the people, do you think, this time, that containing Iran and isolating Iran is more important than protecting human rights in Yemen, for example?
Well, I don't think it's an either-or. I think that when one takes a look at the history of restrictions and sanctions that have been on arms sales by the United States in the past, particularly the Pressler Amendment that revoked and stopped our ability to support the Pakistanis in the late 80s, and what that resulted in with regards to the development of the nuclear weapons by the Pakistanis and other concerns that we had, I think the United States recognizes that you must make a statement, but totally disconnecting yourself from allies only creates a vacuum that will not be filled by responsible parties. These countries will get those weapons, and it is much better for our country to stay engaged with these countries to, if not eliminate the potential for misuse, but at least mitigate it to the maximum extent possible. Now, full disclosure, I'm in this business. But prior to me being in this business, I was the primary regulator for the United States at the Department of State for the control of these weapons. I know what the end-use monitoring looks like. I know the restrictions that we put on, and they are harder and more stringent than any other country in the world. And I can imagine if the United States stopped providing this equipment, I would suspect that the situation would get far, far worse.
Okay, Mark, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us from Baghdad.